the follow-up to the Sharingan video, the explaining the Mangekyou Sharingan video from Swagkage. It's been good to see him jump in subs over the past couple years. Oh, wait, this might actually get copyrighted. The first part is up on the channel. Might have to redo it at some point for quality issues. I think it was past quality when it was more modern. But yeah, no. The part one of this will explain the base Sharingan versus what we're discussing today. Maybe, you two, please. Thank you.
The Mangekyou is one of the most interesting abilities in the Naruto universe, due entirely to the fact that the abilities it grants differ from person to person. When it first appeared in chapter 142 of the Naruto manga, this
is actually a huge misconception that I used to have, like early Naruto Shippuden when I was reading this. So the Mangekyou Sharingan abilities will always differ between people. Just because you have the Mangekyou does not mean you have access to Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu and Susanoo. Susanoo is one of those weird constants, but that felt like Kishimoto wrote himself into a wall a little bit. So, yeah, Susanoo was really one of those Itachi trump card kind of things, but then Madara got access to it, and then Six Paths Obito possessed Kakashi got access to it. So, you know, that's interesting, but no, you won't necessarily get Tsukuyomi. There's a large misconception out there that Sasuke versus Danzo, Sasuke attempted to use Tsukuyomi on Danzo, but that wasn't correct. That wasn't correct. He used a basic Jojutsu Genjutsu on him, and that's actually how he was able to understand that Danzo was affected by Genjutsu, just basic Genjutsu, and be able to make him think he had one more eye open than he did. The concept of a master with a pebble versus someone with a sword, right, is how I liken that too.
Mangekyou Sharingan was shown to be incredibly powerful, capable of leaving Kakashi in critical condition in just a couple of seconds. Next to nothing was explained about the Mangekyou Sharingan for quite a while after its first appearance, save its incredible power and Itachi's inability to use it repeatedly without consequence. As a matter of fact, the actual design of the Mangekyou Sharingan didn't even appear until an entire arc later, in chapter 224, while Sasuke was busy recalling everything that had led up to the massacre of the Uchiha clan.
Yeah, no, Kishimoto let a lot of the let me cook beam. He let a lot of things cook. Madara didn't show up until I think like 7 years after his technical debut in the manga, because it mentioned in the Valley of the End in the part 1 fight, right, where, you know, it mentioned Madara in the Valley of the End where he fought Hashirama there, but Madara didn't actually show up until mid 4th Great Ninja War.
It was later explained in the same series of flashbacks that the Mangekyou can only be awakened by killing one's best friend, though it was later clarified that, as with the base Sharingan, the Mangekyou can be awakened through trauma or stress of any kind. The name of the Mangekyou Sharingan translates to kaleidoscopic copy wheel eye, likely in reference to its appearance.
The keyword there is trauma. Well, not trauma. The keyword there is stress. Because you can have positive stress, eustress, right? Like you got an A on your paper. And then there's distress, right? Which is the negative, right? Your dog did something on the floor and your Roomba ate it up and now you have things everywhere, right? That meme, right? That's distress. You know, it's negative stress. It is stress of any kind, which is why a lot of people were theorizing Sarada would awaken her Sharingan. She actually awoken her Sharingan from a sense of love, from my understanding. An overwhelming feeling of love and, you know, gratitude for her father, Sasuke, and that her Mangekyou could be opened up by similar... all that matters is stress.
As opposed to the regular Sharingan, which for the most part still resembles a regular eyeball, a Mangekyou Sharingan tends to merge the iris and pupil into some sort of pinwheel shape. While the iris still remains red and the pupil still remains black, both sort of intertwine, leading the black portion of the eye...
So this is a technicality. Sasuke is the only example of an exception to this general trend seen in Mangekyou designs. While most have a black design and a red background, his is inverted with a red design and black background. Technically, if we're counting filler, technically Indra has it too. But technically, Indra and Sasuke are technically the same person. Technically, there's weird technicalities there.
To form in
but
the
yes,
shape
Sasuke's Indra's is the exception to the rule.
To put into words, but I think you'll get what I mean if I just show you some examples. As you can see here, the design of the Mangekyou Sharingan differs from person to person, though they tend to follow the general pinwheel trend that I mentioned earlier. There are a few filler-only designs that look really exotic, leading them to break
the filler
whole
were kind of cool
pattern, but they are, well, filler only, so I won't count them.
Yes, chat's right. 99% of the time, filler is not canon. There are things that you can draw from it sometimes, but for the most part, filler technically isn't canon, unless you're like the Tailed Beast filler in early Shippuden with, like, you know, Utakata and Hotaru, because technically that was canon later in the manga, or actually not in the manga, later in the anime, because they had a filler, they actually referenced that filler arc. Canon versus non-canon and filler gets weird.
But anyway, as I mentioned earlier, the difference between various Mangekyou Sharingan is more than just cosmetic. Different Mangekyou possess different abilities as well. While all of these abilities are vision-based, that is to say they are all connected to the user's vision in some way, they still differ quite drastically from one another. In some...
I mean, Tsukuyomi requires direct eye contact to actually engage. Amaterasu is on the focal point. So say if you're looking at your wall to your right, like it would ignite on the wall to your right where you're looking. So Amaterasu is the focal point. Kodama Tsukami is kind of the weird one because it doesn't require eyesight is the thing. Because Danzo is able to... Think of it like an AoE bubble that activates around you because neither Danzo or Shisui ever required it. Technically, the Shisui's eye that used Kodama Tsukami in Itachi's Crow did get eye contact. But I don't know about that one. There seems to be a couple exceptions to the rule, but for the most part it is very focal point of your vision based.
In some cases, the abilities of both a person's Mangekyou will be linked with one another, as is the case with characters like Sasuke and Obito, though in other cases, a person will have two completely distinct abilities that have more or less no correlation with one another, as is the case with Itachi. Regardless of what the abilities are, the jutsu granted by the Mangekyou Sharingan tend to be incredibly powerful.
Generally,
Itachi possesses a Materasu, an inextinguishable black flame ignited at the user's focal point, and Tsukuyomi, one of the most powerful genjutsu...
I actually subscribe to the theory because of how Amaterasu was portrayed in media, how it's the pinnacle of fire ninjutsu. I don't think it was ninjutsu that was used specifically. That it's actually passed down in the Uchiha clan. I don't have any hardcore evidence to back that, but I do subscribe to the theory that Fugaku passed on Amaterasu to Itachi, who passed it on to Sasuke. I do subscribe to that theory. There's a line of logic there, but citing that and backing it with facts is a little hard.
Jutsu in the entire series, capable of altering the victim's perception of time and dishing out unreal amounts of pain. Obito possesses Kamui in both eyes, though each eye's ability differs. The left eye allows him to teleport faraway objects into his pocket dimension so long as that object remains within his focal point, and his right eye allows him to teleport his own body or objects within close range into the same pocket dimension. With it, he can phase through matter by teleporting parts of his body into the dimension, or trap people and objects in the dimension and eject them at a later time.
Yeah, no, Kamui is like S plus tier ability. If I could have one jutsu from Naruto, it'd be Kamui. Easy.
Plenty more examples of super powerful abilities granted by the Mangekyou Sharingan, but I think you get the idea by now. Also, as is the case with the base Sharingan, it is possible for non-Uchiha to use the Mangekyou Sharingan. Again, Kakashi's done it, but this can only be done by evolving a previously transplanted Sharingan or by transplanting another Mangekyou Sharingan. Both have been done before, as Kakashi evolved a previously transplanted Sharingan into the Mangekyou, and Danzo just transplanted a Sharingan that had already evolved into the Mangekyou Sharingan from Shisui Uchiha. Additionally,
he shouldn't be able to deactivate that, though, is the thing, because he should have been... His Shisui's eye should have been activated into its Mangekyou state, and that's the thing that throws me off.
As is the case with the base Sharingan, non-Uchiha will suffer a much higher chakra cost to use the abilities of the Mangekyou Sharingan, though it seems that with training, this cost can be reduced. One ability that is shared across all who possess the Mangekyou Sharingan is the Susano'o, a giant ethereal samurai thing capable of absolutely devastating enemies. The Susano'o can only be used once an Uchiha has unlocked the powers of the Mangekyou Sharingan in both of their eyes, but gaining the Susano'o is well worth the effort. This thing is massive, and once it evolves into its full body form, it is capable of completely devastating most shinobi in the Naruto universe through sheer power alone and with minimal effort.
It's honestly just an over-the-top ability. I mean, yes, it has overwhelming power. It has power quoted as rivaling the Tailed Beast. I would argue it exceeds the power of the Tailed Beasts. While it has a lot of power to it and can also activate as a vessel for mass amounts of chakra, i.e. Sasuke's final Susanoo, where he has the entirety of all nine-tailed beasts crammed into a Susanoo to effectively be a pseudo ten-tails. It's really just an over-the-top ability. It is you are fixing the problem with a hammer versus fixing the problem with a scalpel at that point.
half-body Susano'o, Itachi managed to tank Kirin, a jutsu powerful enough to completely demolish the entire Uchiha hideout.
He also
As
had the
is
mirror,
case
though.
with the Mangekyou Sharingan itself, the appearance of the Susanoo differs from person to person in both.
Technically, it's not necessarily that his Susanoo could have tanked it. I argue it's because he had the Yata mirror. He could have actually just reflected the Raiton that the Kirin was based off of. He could have just absolutely nullified the Kirin itself. So, like, while it destroyed the hideout around him, he himself was safe because it was able to take on the presence of Raiton, the lightning release, and was able to actually nullify it.
Both shape and color. Itachi's is red, Sasuke's is purple, Madara's is blue, Shisui's is green, etc.
Most of them are cool
One
colors
side note
on the
about
color wheel.
Susanoo is that it doesn't seem to be necessary for the user's Sharingan to be active when the Susanoo is used. Itachi used it without even the base Sharingan still active, and Madara used the Susanoo with both of his eyes missing.
This one I do take mass criticism with. I don't think Madara should have been able to use this. I mean, you could argue Itachi did set precedent. I would argue Itachi would have still had his light in his eyes. Madara just didn't have his eyes in general. So thus that leads us down the logic of, okay, so why can't Sasuke use certain abilities without his Rinne Sharingan if all that matters is, you know, that you had the eyes at one point? Madara is, and there's a reason why I coined him Deus Ex Madara, opens up a lot of weird plot things because certain concessions seem to have been made for Madara to do certain things. Like, because in this case, he was under a sand mausoleum with Fuin Jutsu on it, with his healing jutsu on it, and his body should have been restricted for all intents and purposes. The only reason he broke out of this was because he was able to activate Susanoo, which, you know, activated an AoE around him, and then he busted out of the sand mausoleum. So now we're just saying that, people can just use, dojutsu that are required to have eyes without eyes. And yeah, if we're going to use Itachi as precedent here, right? Okay, cool. We're going to use Itachi as precedent here and say, okay, now as long as you don't have the eyes, as long as you had access to them at one point, you should still be able to do it as long as you are Uchiha blood, which also makes it that Kakashi can't get access to it. Thus, which opens up the line of logic in Boruto of if Sasuke lost his Rinne Sharingan because possessed Boruto came out of left field with a kunai, right? And Sakura is like, well, we couldn't save the eye because it was too far gone at that point. We can't regenerate it, right? I mean, you've already opened up the door. Then are you going to say that if they don't have the eye, you can't I think there's a conversation that needs to be had here personally, and I'm very curious on what the end-all answer is going to be. I think we already passed that point, though. We've already time-skipped in Boruto, from my understanding.
As you'd expect, these abilities generally take a lot of chakra to perform, but additionally, repeated use of the Mangekyou's powers will dull the sight and potency of the user's eyes until eventually they go blind and lose their Sharingan entirely.
Right,
Sasuke,
high risk, high reward.
Itachi, and Madara eventually all suffered from this blindness, though Sasuke reached this point much faster due to how frequently he used Amaterasu.
Dude was like button spamming, like Smash Bros. Style with his abilities, though. Yeah, it makes sense he went blind in like, what, a week or two?
Susanoo together against the 5 Kage. Luckily, there is a workaround for this in the form of the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, the absolute pinnacle of the Uchiha's mighty dojutsu. The Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan is what it sounds like, a breed of the Mangekyou that lasts forever. Unlike the base Mangekyou Sharingan, repeated use of the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan will not result in blindness, although it still costs chakra to use the Mangekyou's techniques. Additionally, evolving the Sharingan into the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan seems to increase the finesse and power of the Mangekyou's techniques, the Susanoo in particular.
Yeah.
Before I get into that, let me take a brief moment to explain how the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan is acquired.
I think let's take a minute to kind of go over my theory in regards to how the Mangekyou even works. This does rely on filler a little bit. This does rely on the Hagoromo filler arc, but also how the Mangekyou was actually originally, how the Rinnegan was actually originally incepted into being. So obviously with the Sharingan being the first evolution, right, let's say, of the dojutsu that's required to be the Rinnegan, it would go Sharingan, and then as we see in the filler, it would go just straight to Rinnegan, where you have Hagoromo, and he has a Sharingan awakened, and then he has to gank Hamura because Kage is controlling his brother, and then after that distressful act, and then he rises with the toad paper, he awakens his Rinnegan. Now this is filler, obviously take this with a grain of salt. However, we can see, backed by the series itself, through distress, you can evolve your Sharingan from 1 Tomoe, 2 Tomoe, 3 Tomoe up to Mangekyou, right? The way that I interpret how the Sharingan actually works into going into the Rinnegan and why the Mangekyou is actually a mutation is that after Hagoromo, and this is outside of filler, we do know that his bloodline was split into two, whether that's plot contrivance, whether that's Punnett Square, right? Whatever that's going to be, however you argue it. You have one side of his lineage, which is the Senju clan, Hashirama. You have who has his, his cells, right? Who has certain abilities, and then you have the other side, which is the Uchiha, which got his dojutsu as well as some of his chakra reserves, right? And so these are two halves of a greater whole, which is Hagoromo. And, yes, it gets diluted as the years go by down. That's where you get Indra and Ashura reincarnated against certain individuals like Madara and Hashirama. I actually don't necessarily take much narrative issue with that because at the end of the day, they still could have chosen not to do anything with their lives, and Indra Ashura would be null and moot at that point, right? However, because the initial Hagoromo way of evolving the Sharingan is Sharingan to Rinnegan, without having access to the other side of that gene pool, I guess is what I'll say, without having access to the Senju side, the Sharingan will attempt to evolve into the Rinnegan, but with lack of Senju DNA, with lack of the Senju, the other half of Hagoromo's pool, right, it doesn't have the required requisites. So, for example, Madara actually was able to evolve on his, near his deathbed, right, near his time of death. He was able to evolve his Mangekyou into the Rinnegan and actually subsequently get one of his eyes back that had been closed because he used Izanagi on a timer. Once again, Deus Ex Madara, but, we have showcased that this is the point multiple times, right? Where if you have, or at least in canon, where if you have a Mangekyou and you have the requisites of having like Senju DNA or Senju cells, you can, over enough period of time, you can evolve it into a Rinnegan. So this leads you into how I interpret it as the Mangekyou is a mutation because it lacks the required requisites to evolve into the Rinnegan. Therefore, it attempts to manifest the Rinnegan, but it does so in a mutated way, which still gives you certain properties that use yin-yang release, such as conjuring black flames. I'm a fan of the notion that Amaterasu is not actually fire. It's, think like the Godo Dama, or think like the black chakra rods, right? How they're things that act like certain other things. I would argue it might be a form of yin-yang, and obviously I'm sure there's something actually on the Naruto wiki that might debunk this. To me, it feels like it's something Sixth Path that is acting like fire, but is not truly fire. So, I mean, that's how I interpret that. Tsukuyomi being able to cast such a powerful genjutsu, Itachi was very pacifist by nature, so rather than just gank somebody, right, it's going to remove them from the battle for a little bit, right? Obito being able to literally traverse space and time, right, with Kamui, right? I would argue all these have a hand in working by Sixth Path Chakra, yin-yang release. So because we know that the Sharingan by definition has a piece of the Sage of Six Paths, we have that as its descendants, it attempts to manifest but fails to manifest, therefore creating mutation that is the Mangekyou. So that is in more or less words how I think the Mangekyou actually functions.
The process is pretty simple. All you've got to do is swap out your Mangekyou Sharingan with somebody else's. Granted, the exchange needs to be done between two Uchiha with strong blood ties, ideally two siblings, and additionally progressing the Mangekyou Sharingan into an eternal Mangekyou Sharingan.
Well, technically yes, because we know outside of that filler in canon. Who said it? It was Madara, I think. At the very least, even if you take the filler out of consideration where, Hagoromo didn't... And we're saying Hagoromo didn't have the Sharingan for whatever reason, right? We do know from Madara, Deus Ex Madara, we know from Madara that the Sharingan does, in fact, evolve into the Rinnegan. So at the very least, we can at least argue that.
Sharingan may only be possible if the person receiving the transplant has already blinded themselves. I'm not sure about that, but that's been the case with both characters who have unlocked Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, so it's possible.
It's possible,
Regardless, once the transplant is complete, the person on the receiving end will evolve their eyes into the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan without losing access to any of their previous abilities. Additionally, the designs of the original Mangekyou Sharingan will be merged with that of the eyes that were transplanted, though this does not grant the owner of the Sharingan access to any new abilities.
We also don't know if this is an inherent Indra-ism, like this is a holdover from Indra and being outcast in the filler, or at the very least, this isn't a holdover from, Madara and Madara losing Izuna to get the Eternal Mangekyou. So you could argue that it could be because we know that Indra also inhabited Madara, and we know they inhabited Sasuke. This is canon because it was during the dream sequence before the two, Naruto and Sasuke, both revived, right? We know that this is canon and not filler. You know, it could be argued that this might be an Indra-ism, being able to give these people special permissions, especially if they've lost a loved one with a Sharingan. You could potentially find a theoretical argument for that, but, you know, that's inherently, if you have blinded yourself and have a close blood relative, you should be able to take their eyes and fix your own.
Sasuke didn't gain access to Tsukuyomi, and Madara didn't gain access to any of Izuna's techniques, whatever those may have been. Also, it's worth noting that the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan is incredibly rare, as Sasuke and Madara are the only two characters
only
with
two
the
known
ability, like, ever. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying earlier, having the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan doesn't really grant a person any extra abilities. Instead, it just makes their existing abilities more powerful and takes away their previous restrictions.
I argue that Madara's ability was actually getting just a huge amp. There's a difference in the, at least in the anime, when you see pre-EMS Madara fighting and post-EMS Madara fighting. I would argue that one of his bonuses, because we only really ever see him use Susanoo, is that he got massive physical amps.
While Sasuke's Amaterasu didn't seem to get buffed too heavily by the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, the Susanoo seems to receive quite a boost in strength. Now, granted, Kakashi and Indra have both used the perfect Susanoo without access to the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, but, well, Indra's a special case since he's the son of the Sage of Six
Yeah, he
Paths,
gets
and
special
Kakashi,
exceptions.
Well, he got access to his perfect Susanoo through some really weird spirit transfer process, so I don't know if that counts either. That and in Ultimate Ninja Storm 4, Itachi and Shisui have perfect Susanoo.
I don't like this. I wish they would have not given them the perfect Susanoo, but I mean, I get why they did it.
And they don't have Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, but that's a game, so I don't know if it counts either. But okay, regardless of the requirements to do so, evolving the Susanoo is possible, and I actually think it's something that I should touch on. When first used, the Susanoo takes a skeletal form, and only parts of its body, namely its ribcage and arms, will appear when called forth.
Right.
Through continuous use of the Susanoo,
We've gone over this in the Susanoo video.
An entire skeletal.
It's like when you're learning something, how maybe you're able to draw, like, you know, a helmet at first, but then you're able to, like, start drawing a face, then you're able to start drawing maybe like Oni horns, right? How you're able to get better at drawing over time. It's the same thing. You use the skill to increase your versatility and skill with that, right?
Body, which they can further evolve into a humanoid form complete with flesh, clothing, and a unique weapon. In most cases, the final evolution of the Susanoo that can be reached with the base Mangekyou Sharingan is the armored Susanoo, which is, as it sounds, Susanoo clad in unique armor that heavily reinforces its defenses. With the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan, Madara and Sasuke...
You can still, if you're able to drag the user out, because we see this with a couple of Madara's Susanoos, like namely this one with this half on the ground, right? Gaara was able to snake his sand underneath and yank him out of it. I'm assuming with the armored Susanoo, while harder, if you can yank them out of that Susanoo, because the Susanoo is longer being quote-unquote piloted, you would be able to dissipate that Susanoo, because the Susanoo is no longer protecting its core, which the core being the person summoning
they
it.
managed to progress their Susanoo even further by manifesting a lower body that grants the Susanoo an incredible boost in mobility. Like, now it can jump around with legs and stuff. It's crazy. It doesn't end there, though, as the final stage of the Susanoo is the stabilized perfect Susanoo, or, as the 4th data book calls it, the complete body Susanoo. The power of the complete
giant
body
Tengu
Susanoo
samurai
is allegedly comparable to that of the tailed beasts, making it one of the highest level techniques in Naruto. Madara effortlessly shattered mountains with the shockwaves his perfect Susanoo created. And
I mean, I would argue, if you're arguing it's comparable to the tailed beast, it's going to be like 8 tails or 9 tails, because you have to remember the tailed beasts go up in power. So Shukaku is incredibly weaker than Matatabi, is weaker than Isobu, is weaker than Kokuo. No, Son Goku is weaker than Kokuo, is weaker than Saiken, is weaker than Chome, is weaker than Gyuki, is weaker than Kurama, right? Every one of them is a tier up with the more tails.
Sasuke has managed to slash through planetoids with ease. Again, I'm a little unsure how the perfect Susanoo is acquired, but I think in most cases it is only accessible through the Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan.
Susanoo is just Masashi Kishimoto trying to live out his mech dreams that he could never publish because Naruto got too big. I could see that. The perfect Susanoo was definitely a little over the top.
Could be wrong, though. There is a bit more to the Sharingan than all of this, but because of how personalized its abilities tend to be, covering everything would take a really long time, so I think this is where I'm going to end off. If not for the fact that it could be its own video topic, I would speak about the Rinnegan here,
That's
but
its own
all
video.
I'll say about it here is that the Rinnegan is an evolution of the Sharingan and the most powerful dojutsu in the world of Naruto. If enough of you guys want me to, I'll gladly cover it in a future video, but for now,
I think he's right on that one.
Hopefully you all enjoyed the video, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Swagkage out.
Obviously you have... normalizing audio, my dude. That got me. Okay. Sorry, chat. I wasn't aware that was going to be that big. Woo, that was an audio jump. Oh, man. But yeah, no, I've spent way too much time in Naruto, and I miss the CCG every single day. This Naruto CCG, as it was, even if they started over from a set 1, I would drop every other game if it was the same Naruto CCG that we had that died back in 2013. Been in this series way too long. Absolutely love discussing it, you know, all that fun stuff. But yeah, what are your thoughts in the comments? Definitely, if you have any citations on things, I'm very curious to hear them. You know, what are your thoughts on Deus Ex Machina? Is that something that you will use? Is that something that you agree with? What are your thoughts on Sarada's potential awakening of her Mangekyou? Let me know in the comments.